The song that angels sing, the spell that calls, the gathering, the magic that might bring eternal light, the gathering.
Hello and welcome to the first edition of the Gathering Podcast. I'm here with my brother Jay Davis.
Hello.
And we're just going to talk about things that is magic, and this is just our opinions and insights, and you get no say in it, so just listen up and have a good time. This one particularly has to do with the recent changes of the format Modern. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, Modern is an eternal format that includes all of the sets with the Modern card frame. You can probably search that to see what that means, but basically it's similar to a legacy format. Like, all these cards never rotate when a new set comes out. The new set is just included to the format, and it just stays that way forever. And cards don't rotate. They're either banned or not. And if they're not banned, well, you just got to deal with them if they're overpowered, and usually they get banned. And the ban list is in particular is what we're wanting to talk about. So I would say the biggest, most recent news that has come to our light is the fact that Modern is now an F&M format. Now, that's really going to shake a lot of things up.
No, it's not.
Okay, well, it'll be more inclusive to other people playing it. Like, it's not just going to be a PTQ format anymore.
No tournament organizer and no store owner anywhere is saying, yes, I'm going to change my F&M format that everyone's came to for the last however long I've been open playing Standard. Now I'm going to tell them they all have to get new decks. This is not going to happen.
Well, the interesting thing about that is it already happens a little in Standard. I mean, when the Standard format changed, everybody's got to get new decks. And that's one of the things people dislike about Standard, which is, I think, why they started to include Modern into F&M. Now, I have only heard of a couple of stores actually doing it so far, so you're right, it's definitely not happening a lot. And it's very, very recent, so I guess we'll have to see how that plays out.
You know what else is an F&M format? Draft.
Yeah, that is something you don't... Well, around here in the Joplin area of Missouri, they have draft every other week, but you don't hear a whole lot about draft F&Ms as much anymore. But you're right, that is a
So that's what's going to happen to
much.
Modern. Everyone's used to Standard as F&M. That's how it just always has been.
Yeah.
Its own inertia is going to carry it. I don't think Modern being an FM format is going to suddenly make the format be more played.
That's true. I don't necessarily think it'll be more played in the sense of, what it is as a format.
Like now, if players are looking at getting in the format, like serious players, not players who just want to play this elf deck, or players who want to play this Kiskin deck and they can't play it in Standard, or players who don't want to buy the new set and all that stuff, those players, they're going to get a Modern more for casual reasons, or just like, I need to say I'm a Magic player, so here's the format I'm playing. But like serious players who are going to get a Modern are just going to look at Modern like a fight between a boyfriend and a girlfriend you don't know. And like, they're arguing, and you can kind of tell what the arguments are based on. You kind of side with one of them, but you don't want to mess with that fight. Because right now, Modern's all over the place with its bannings. Like if you look at the history of the bannings in Modern, like, what deck do you buy? Because this is an eternal format, so you got to be willing to buy a little bit up front. What deck do you buy? Do you buy Jund? No, they might ban the next card out of it. You buy those Goyfs, they might ban Goyf. I mean, if Bloodbraid is banned, nothing is sacred. Like, Nakatl is on this list.
Yeah, I mean, I completely sympathize there, and that's one of the problems with R&D, and when they go forward and ban cards or even talk about it, is because that's something they got to take into consideration is players' investments that they make, especially it being an eternal format. They're going to put down the big dollars to start accumulating the cards for their decks, but they're going to be worried that their decks can get the ban hammer. And even if a card comes off the ban list, it's still not even meaningful. I mean, Jace has been in talk for a while now, and everybody likes Jace the Mind Sculptor. I mean, even if you dislike him as a card for the format, you still like him. Like, you want him to be there, even though he's obviously too good. But everybody thought he was going to get a ban. His price goes up, and then boom, they ban Bloodbraid Elf, and then obviously you're not going to Jace in a non-Bloodbraid Elf format. It's just so implausible.
Well, like, the thing with Jace is they banned him primarily for money reasons, and which makes no sense, because like, banning things causes money problems. Unbanning things generally doesn't. Jace is expensive. He's going to be expensive. We just got to deal with that, right? Now, they're really trying really hard with the new updates in Gatecrash. I'm just going to briefly allude to this. Like, they're trying to flood the market with the Shocklands so that the Shocklands go down in value. They printed 2 sets of Shocklands, and they're printing a 3rd set of Shocklands, where you have a guaranteed chance to get a Shockland in every pack. So, and the fact that they're reprinting them means they might just show up in the rare slot anyway. So, like, I don't know if they're going to do that with Jace, but you just got to face the fact if you're playing competitive Magic, cards are going to be expensive. Good cards are going to be expensive. And in the Eternal format, since Jace is no longer in Standard, like, you shouldn't feel bad about paying $100 for one of the most powerful cards that you're ever going to play with. Like, I just don't see why that doesn't follow for people. Like, every week, Star City Games holds a tournament that gives out thousands of dollars in prizes, and you're complaining because you have to spend $100 or even $200 on one of the most powerful tools to win the game that pays out these kind of prizes. Like, I just don't understand that level of complaining. Like, Jace, from a competitive standpoint, there's no reason he should be banned. Bloodbraid Elf was a card. If they unban Punishing Fire is a card. Now, Jace and Punishing Fire in the same deck, yeah, that's going to happen. But I just don't see Jace as, like, you play your Jace, and even if you plus him, you know, they get one dude through and hit you with Punishing Fire twice, and Jace is gone. And they still have Punishing Fire. And all you got was a Fate Seal out of it. If you brainstorm, they just need Punishing Fire. They can Punishing Fire, dead Jace. Or they can just Bloodbraid into anything and hit you.
Yeah, I see. I mean, and I think that's a good segue into the next part, which is that we're actually going to analyze the ban list right now, because it's probably one of the more controversial parts of Magic is the Modern ban list.
Alright, so first up are the new bannings, the most recent bannings to Modern. And that is Bloodbraid Elf and Seething Song. So what do you think about that?
Well, obviously, I don't like that they went ahead and banned more cards. I don't think that's the fix of Modern right now, because the problem isn't the cards that are existing. It's the cards that are not existing. I mean, if the cards existing aren't the problem, then banning them is not the solution.
Well, why don't we move on to our next topic then, the reasons for banning cards and the pros and cons of those cards. Personally, I think the reason they ban cards in Modern is not because it's overpowered or warps the format. I think that tears is the real reason. The tears of the players who died a Bloodbraid Elf into Liliana. That's why they banned Bloodbraid Elf.
And honestly, they're not at this new update where they banned Bloodbraid Elf and I guess Seething Song. They're not banning cards. They're trying to ban decks. Yeah, and honestly, what would be the player reaction, the community's reaction, if they only banned certain exact combinations of cards to be played in tournaments? And you took, let's say, the last 3 months of all the 4-0 lists of anything that's similar to what we call Jund, and you said you cannot play those combinations of cards or anything like that. If they were to update such a list or such a new amount of new information, what do you think would be the play? Well, the players say, well, that's absurd. You don't do something like that. And honestly, I don't see it being any qualitatively different than them trying to remove a key element from a deck, because they're just trying to remove a deck.
Well, no, I think some would make the argument that they're not trying to just get rid of Jund, they're just trying to lower its power level down.
Yeah, but you could, at that point, you could just say, well, you can't play Bloodbraid Elf in this combination of cards, or you can't play Tarmogoyf in this combination of cards with Bloodbraid Elf, or something like that. And that's really what they're doing. But obviously, that doesn't work with a format and a system of banning, so what you do is you just ban a card. That seems to make it a central part. But when you think of it that way, when you think of it, okay, well, you just can't play these cards together, and we're like, oh, obviously that's stupid. And I think that's really the problem here. You don't just do that when something's too good. You don't just remove it in that sense.
Ever since Jund's real dominance has taken over, and I use air quotes if you can't, because you guys can't see me, but the real dominance has really happened since Deathrite Shaman came out, right after Return to Ravnica, and the Pro Tour that was won by the Eggs player, Stanislav Sivka. That Pro Tour there has been it was a Pro Tour.
Yeah.
And there have been 2 major events that were Grand Prix after that were Modern. One of them was won by Jund, and the other was won by a deck that eludes me at the moment. But the point being is that, yes, Jund was dominant in all 3 of these from a numbers perspective, right? Like, a large percentage of the field was Jund. And a lot of people interpret that to mean that Jund is clearly the most powerful deck, that the whole metagame's based on your Jund matchup. Like, if you have a deck that just has a terrible Jund matchup, you just cannot take it to a tournament. And that last part is kind of true. Anytime you have a deck that's, like, ubiquitous in the format, then if your deck just loses to that deck, you can't, like, if for somehow White Weenie playing only, like, Elite Vanguards was the number 1 deck played. Like, let's just say you could play however many Elite Vanguards you wanted, right? So let's just say 40 Elite Vanguards, 20 planes, that's your deck. Like 60% of the field plays that deck. If your deck just loses to 20 or 40 Elite Vanguards, then yeah, you're going to have a problem taking that deck to a tournament if that's your field. Like, that's just metagaming. So that's not really an argument against it. Now, the other side is that everyone chooses that. The reason it's so represented is because everyone believes that's the most powerful deck. And when you look at all the decks in Modern, they're really squeezing every ounce of power out of the cards, because a lot of these decks are like the gift storm decks, some of the storms decks. I look at them and my first impression was I thought they were sloppy, but I'm used to looking at like legacy storm lists and vintage storm lists, and obviously a way better card selection in those formats. But in Modern, they're squeezing every ounce of power out of these cards. So, and you saw it if you watch the coverage for Sifka's run. Like, he really understood his eggs deck, and he got every piece of value out of every card he could, and that's how he was able to only lose one round in the Swiss and then win the whole thing with a really complicated deck, because he really understood the gears. Now, not everybody spends this much time on Modern. A lot of the players spend most of their time on Draft and Standard, because guess what? Every week, Star City Games hosts a big tournament for Standard and Draft. And yeah, they have Legacy, but Legacy already has an established metagame, so that really is irrelevant to what I'm saying here. And that is, when you got pros going to a high-level event, they're going to grab the deck that is most likely to give them the most benefit relative to their ability to play it. And when you look at Jund, it's a really baseline deck. It's really consistent. It's not really fast. It's not really slow. It's not really strong. It's definitely not weak. Like, when I say it's not really strong, I mean it doesn't make Emrakul's and smash your face. It doesn't storm you out on one turn.
Right. It doesn't play anything like really powerful. It does very attritioning card advantage and
it's the most valuable rates of exchange across its colors. That's what Brian Kibler said. That's what Jund is. And when you look at it through that scope, if you haven't really tested, and if you're not super familiar with these other complicated decks, you're going to take a deck that requires either no thought, like Infect or Affinity, or you're going to take a deck that just gives you the most efficient cards you can play with,
which is Jund.
And so it's a safe pick. And when everyone says the metagame is dominated by Jund, Affinity, and Infect, I say that's a symptom of an unpopular format. That's all it is. The pros do not play the format enough, so they're going to take decks that don't help them screw up.
And you can really see this. Yeah, you can really see this in the early Modern tournaments. The first tournaments were won by decks like Zoo, and then when Zoo got banned, the Grand Prix were won by what's called Robots, which is what we would call Affinity.
Yeah.
And these are the kind of decks, because the format wasn't really that well defined, you had some really obvious combo decks, and then the really obvious combo decks that just transitioned into Modern, like Splinter Twin was doing pretty well, and that doesn't require any thinking either. I think what you're saying is very true.
Well, no, because if you look at the online list, more recently, Jund has just taken online because I think that's a symptom of net decking.
That was also something I was going to mention is the more recent thing is the sudden surgence of the appearance of Jund online. Like, just everyone and their mom is playing Jund. And there's something you got to take into consideration. It's not always, a deck doesn't always win in large quantities of numbers because it's good, but it's just because that's what everybody's playing. There's something about what it means to be Jund. And I would just say just the best of its colors. And when you think about what the cards in the Modern Jund deck, and even really the standard Jund deck were, but more so the Modern, because of it being an eternal format, it is the best combination of those cards' colors. Yeah. I mean, everybody already had their Dark Confidants, their Tarmogoyfs from other decks, and you just throw Bloodbraid Elf in, and then ta-da, you've got a deck. And Liliana obviously just fits in there, and you've got all your obvious removal spells. And it's so easy to build this deck. Of course, a lot of people are going to have it, and they're going to play it, and it's going to win. I think it's streamlined, and you don't ban cards for this reason. I think this is why everybody's upset.
Well, okay. The thing was, what I was going to say is, leading up to Sifka's run in that Pro Tour, this was after Return to Ravnica. If you follow the Modern format on forums or any kind of community, you could see that online the trend was towards decks like Eggs. The trends was towards decks like the Trap decks.
Right before the Pro Tour?
Yeah, right before the Pro Tour. Trap decks and these weird Gifts Ungiven decks. Not the Gift Storm decks, or not the Reanimator, but just value gifts decks. And everyone was like, it's going to be the Trap deck, or it's going to be some combo. This is what it's going to be. The pros didn't get this news. The pros have been busy playing some open the week before, or whatever they grinded, practicing draft because you got to know your draft. Like, this is what the pros weren't thinking based off the online meta yet.
Right.
Like, they had looked at the numbers. I guarantee you they had looked at the numbers.
Yeah, they do their study, but I know
But
what you're saying.
when they look at the numbers and the numbers are telling them eggs and trap and all these complicated decks, they're gonna give you a big fat Yao Ming face and grab Jund. Like, if you've got like a week to test, like, you're not gonna grab the most intricate deck that you got to know every sideboard slot, what card you take out, whether you're on the play, you're on the draw, all this stuff. Like, you're not gonna do that. Like, if I was a pro, I wouldn't do that if I didn't have that experience, because you are risking a lot of money. Like, you're just gonna take what you know can perform, given your experience, and you're gonna run with that.
Right, and like I said earlier, I don't think that's sufficient reason for banning a card because a deck in that circumstance is going to start winning a few tournaments. These kind of decks are always going to exist, and it's just like Zoo. What it means to be Gen, what it means to be Zoo will be around no matter what card you ban. And honestly, banning Bloodbraid Elf isn't going to solve the problem. I mean, even if it's going to weaken that exact list and maybe even that style of deck, like replacing it with Huntmaster, even though not sufficient for Bloodbraid Elf, I think the deck will still exist. And I even think it might put up about the same numbers. And it's just, that's not the solution because it's not the problem. I don't think Jund is a problem given its circumstances. And I really honestly think at this point, when people are just putting their best amount of cards together, I think that's kind of revelatory of the general power creep of creatures over the last few sets. And that's just kind of a consequence of an eternal format. Where people are going to have all these extra cards and the best creatures and they put them together.
Well, I mean, you're not going to get rid of that.
Right. So, I mean, you've got to pick your losses when you're going to set up these formats and say, okay, these are going to exist. And they're not always going to win given what they are. Like, there's going to be circumstances where this kind of deck obviously beats Jund. It's going to be around for a while, and it'll be kind of a rock, paper, scissors effect. That's just how eternal formats work. And honestly, Legacy is actually stabilized at that. Like, you don't have your Merfolk winning a lot anymore because, newer sets are coming out. These combinations of cards are working a little better here.
Well,
and so they
honestly,
suppress that. And
if you look at Legacy, you'll see three major shifts in the meta. You'll get these blue-based, what I call leverage decks, and that touches on my idea of tactical win condition that we won't get into. But you'll get these blue-based leverage decks, like I'm talking your Show and Tell, your Dream Halls, your Omniscience and Show and Tell, your Reanimator. These decks that use blue to keep it safe, and they make these big, powerful plays, right?
Right.
And then Merfolk starts preying on those decks. And eventually Merfolk and Delver will start slowly chipping away at those decks until people realize that matchup is good and start playing that, right? And then when you get all the tempo lists and Merfolk on top, you'll start seeing Burn and Dredge will take a couple opens. Like, if you've watched this over the last few years, about in the summer, usually, you'll start to see Dredge and Burn come back. They'll take a few opens, and then guess what beats those? The blue leverage decks. So the blue leverage decks come back, they smash up on Burn and Dredge, and then it starts back over. That is your Legacy cycle.
Well, they've also had this new introduction to what I call the middle grounds, which includes decks like Maverick or half combos like Enchantress or Elves. And then I don't really know where they exact take over, but they will sneak in there once in a while.
They rise up during the Dredge period.
Yeah,
the summer.
I've noticed that too.
Like, when Dredge and Burn start taking tournaments away from Merfolk, you'll start to see, because if I had infinite resources, I could tell you exactly what kind of deck you need to take to a Legacy tournament because I've just seen this pattern over and over again. And it surprises me that it hasn't sped up to where it's almost a week-to-week thing, where you got Merfolk, Dredge, leverage, Merfolk, Dredge, leverage, and it just boom, boom, boom. Because, it's so predictable.
Yeah, and that's something I think will kind of, maybe to a different degree, will happen in Modern. And Modern's too young right now, and that's why the Jund kind of deck is going to, at the moment, it's going to be the thing, and it's just going to be something we're going to have to weather, and we'll move on. Well, it might not rotate, but even with new cards coming out, new decks will come out, or people will start playing other decks to combat Jund, and then there's going to be a deck that beats that deck, and that's going to be the one that wins. And that's actually what ended up happening last Pro Tour. Jund was the deck that beat all these other bad, overpowered, unfair decks. Not overpowered, but unfair decks, like combo-y, half-combo decks like the Pods.
In fact.
Yeah, that's what the Jund decks just beat down. And actually, Jund decks don't really, well, they kind of beat Infect because of heavy removal, but they don't just beat Infect by what it is. But that's what Eggs beats, and that's why I won the tournament.
Yeah,
Like,
Eggs just destroys Jund. Problem is, that's a hard deck to play. Like,
right, and
not just anyone can play that deck. Okay, and like there were only like 2 or 3 people that even made it to day 2 with that deck, and Sifka was the only guy to make it all the way.
And,
But
and like you said earlier, I'm not Jund isn't easy, but it's simple, and that's something players want to do in a very unsure circumstance in a tournament, though, especially a pro tour.
well, yeah, well,
Like,
no, Jund. If you're a relatively seasoned player, not even a pro, Jund is an easy deck to play. Okay, you keep a balanced hand with good mana, some way to interact with your opponent in the first 2 turns, and hopefully a value card.
and yeah, well, I mean, all your
like,
cards are just that good.
yeah, well, no, that I just described your mulligan for Jund. Okay, I'm not a pro. I haven't even won a PTQ. I haven't even top 8 at a PTQ. That is your mulligan decision for Jund. Some good way to interact with your opponent, the first 2 turns, balanced mana, and a mid-game play. That is your Jund hand. Okay, it is not hard.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why more people are going to play it, and it's about numbers at that point. There's so many people playing, it's going to win more. That's just and obviously not being a bad deck. Your good deck, a lot of people play it, you're going to win a lot of tournaments. That's just in numbers. But I think that also moves us into our last topic. We're going to go over the general point of the ban list, some of the cards that are on there. We're going to go over all the cards, and which is really the Modern of what it is my favorite format personally. I like what it entails. I like the cards that exist, and I like the cards that don't exist. It's in terms of format and legacy and so on. But I don't like the ban list, and the more they just make it so debauched, and it makes me dislike what the format state is, even though I like the format itself. And when they banned Bloodbraid off, that just made me dislike it more. I don't want to see any more cards banned. I don't think any more cards that exist need to be banned. And all I think at the moment, I think certain cards need to be unbanned. And I think that could help answer decks like Jund by unbanning certain cards. And certain cards in the vacuum of unbanningness might be a little too powerful, but unban other cards and they'll help offset them. And that just puts more cards in the format. And the most obvious objection someone would raise is, well, then everybody's just going to play those cards. But obviously, it just doesn't work. It just refutes itself because everybody's just going to play the other best cards. And so you can't reason that way when it comes to allowing cards to exist and not.
I think we should kind of get back to the beginning of Modern and what it was supposed to be, what the goal of the format is, what some of their Wizards' stated restrictions are, and try to at least build an internal concept here, like why, given the framework that Wizards has put forward for Modern, does banning these cards fit into that? And also on the grander scale, should we accept that framework with these cards factored in?
Okay, yeah, that reminds me of some of the mentality behind Modern, which was generally a more affordable legacy or eternal format, a more
not necessarily
friendly to the player. Like they already have some of these cards. It doesn't have the reserve list to worry about to inflate the price of a lot of these, and it doesn't have
it's a
dual lands.
It's a non-rotating format that is not susceptible to the reserve list. That is it. And Wizards stated they wanted it to be a turn 4 format. And personally, I'm okay with that because Legacy's already a turn 3 format. I can understand not wanting a turn 3 format where there is no such thing as force of will. Like that makes some sense to me. But with that in mind, let's go through the list. See how these cards affect that. All right. Obviously, I don't think the eternal format thing is going to be affected by what's a ban. Like it's going to be an eternal format.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned with the turn 4 and the stated reasons for banning the cards. If the stated reasons don't really hold up and they don't the cards don't really violate those rules, then obviously I think that's a failure as a banning.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the cards on this list fail that criteria, and that's why hopefully they'll slowly begin to unban them. There's some of these I have no hope of them unbanning, like Jace the Mind Sculptor. I don't think they're going to ban it, even though it fully needs to be unbanned. But we can always be hopeful, and then a lot of the other people in the community agree with me, so maybe it'll get somewhere. But starting with the list, the first card is Ancestral Visions.
All right, let's go back. Eternal format wise, yeah, it's an eternal card, no problem there. Turn 4. Well, this card doesn't even do anything until turn 4, and that's if you draw it in your opening hand. So I really don't see a violation here. Aaron Forsyth himself said they banned this card. Listen to this, guys. They banned it because they hadn't banned a blue card yet, and he didn't like how if you had it on turn 1, I could 1-for-1 you with counter spells and then refill on turn 4. That is why they banned Ancestral Visions. Like, think about that. That is why they banned a card. Like, think about your favorite card right now. Could someone make a bad argument like that about your card and have it banned? Like, I'm not saying it will be, but when you think about it in the terms that, like, your favorite card could be banned because someone doesn't like how it affects them, and it happens to be a red card, and they needed to ban more red cards. Like, this is bad thought.
Yeah,
This is
this is
not
just
good.
the simple. This is the kind of reason we have to deal with. This is the kind of R&D we're gonna have to just put up with for a while. And they're like, well, we need a blue card ban. Why? Why do you have to have all the colors in the ban list? Is it like a party? Like, do we have to say, okay, well, we don't have enough diversity here. It's like a racial diversity thing for commercials. So, okay, well, we need you and you. I mean, it doesn't. It's not like you're trying to give equal rights to all these colors.
The closest thing I could think is that they're worried that if each color is not affected by the ban list, that the color that's not affected
let's also have a
will be
huge
stronger.
assumption that all the
Yeah.
colors are equal in the way they work and perform and the card's available, and this is not true.
Yeah.
And I think the only thing maybe to consider with Ancestral Visions and Power is its effectiveness with Cascade.
And they banned Bloodbraid.
Yeah, and so I don't even see good arguments for this anymore. I don't see good reason for this card to be on the ban list. I think it's there's less obvious cards in this one. Like, I could see this one being banned over other ones, but I don't think it fits the criteria. So
Yeah.
I think we're in agreement that this card can come off the ban list. The next one being Ancient Den, everybody in ever is in agreement that the artifact lands can stay banned. So we'll just skip that one next to Bitter Blossom. How do you feel about Bitter Blossom?
Okay, well, let's go back to the beginning. You got to remember where your focus point is and stick to it. Okay? Eternal card, yes. Turn 4 rule, no, I don't see. I don't see how this card kills you before turn 4.
I don't even see how it makes it meaningful. Like, if they're like turn 1,
Okay,
Thoughtseize, turn 2, Bitter Blossom, I'm not even, it's not that devastating, especially with combo decks.
Well, yeah, like they could do all that, and then you could top deck a Gifts Ungiven and throw Iona in their face.
Yeah, like,
2
it
turns
just
later.
doesn't. It's just the
it
card
just
was a
doesn't
cute
matter.
little enchantment that doesn't do anything.
No. Here, let's go back. Initially, okay, and I understand this. When they made Modern, this was one of the cards that started on the ban list. Okay?
Right. So along with Ancestral Visions, like, this is
Yeah.
one of the what we call launcher bannings, and
Yeah.
and this had a lot to do with its performance in Standard. It was like the Jund of its time. It was called Fairies, and this was This was like the Bloodbraid Elf of Fairies, and it. Like, obviously they're not identical in their performance and dominance, but it was
standard
similar.
deck.
Yeah, and it was a standard deck, and because they were just worried about that.
Well,
And
no. Here's how I see it. When you make a new format, especially a format that has a similar card pool to other formats that have existed, sometimes they will ban cards in the short term to force a format to exist so that people don't just go straight to the decks they know. Because we've already talked about how that's a big problem where everyone just goes to the decks they know instead of studying these other decks like eggs. They just go to Jund because they know Jund, right? Affinity, if you factor in the artifact lands, and fairies, if you factor in Ancestral Vision, Bitter Blossom, they were ready to go card for card, best versions from Extended. Like, when they announced Modern, you could just take the extended versions of those decks and start day one of Modern with those decks as fully legal. And while I agree, in this meta, those cards would be fine. At the beginning, when people are trying to test stuff out and they've got these perfectly tuned and ready to go decks, that can be problematic for the development of the format. Even though, in the grand scheme of the format, they're not bad. But the problem is, those should be viewed as short-term bans. We have a metagame in Modern. You might not like it, whatever, but there is some kind of understanding of where the decks lie.
that actually makes
These cards can come off.
Yeah, that makes me very surprised that they didn't ban some other cards of just ready to sleeve up go decks. Now, the most obvious one, at least as far as banning the artifact lands, just because Affinity would be a very obvious, probably one of the more powerful strategies, is that it was a card for card list,
From
all
Legacy.
Modern from a Legacy. It won a Legacy Open.
Yeah,
So
deck,
that was more obvious.
We
I
have
think.
that deck. That deck is ridiculous. It is a turn 3 deck consistently. And like we said, that violates the turn 4 rule. So obviously there's no argument there. But like I said, for me, Bitter Blossom, when I first saw it on the launch list, I was okay with it because I understood, yeah, we want people to not just have to... Because like when you get this new format, there are going to be people who are trying to find the new good decks, right? And it's not going to help that happen when they've got a perfectly tuned fairy list smashed in their face on day one. But That said, I think enough time has passed that Bitter Blossom can come off.
Uh,
It doesn't
yeah.
cause any problems, right? One of the biggest interactions was Bitter Blossom and Umezawa's Jitte, which is also banned. So you're really not like, you're not, there's also the tokens deck where you go turn 1 Apparition, turn 2 Bitter Blossom, turn 3 I don't know, the 3-drop that makes 3/1/1s, and buy.
Oh, yeah. Starts with P. Yeah, he draws a blank there, but yeah, I think there's also a
Then
similar list to that in Legacy
and then
that
turn
just
4
use
you
Legacy
play an
dual lands.
Anthem, and then turn 4 you play an Anthem and smash them for 14. Like the deck is
Yeah, that deck is really good.
yeah, but it'd be fair now. There's enough freaking removal. Like that's what I'm saying. Initially, when a format's forming, I can see a case for that kind of a card being banned because when you've got fully formed fairies and then a deck that smashes you for 14 on turn 4 with its tokens, when you're trying to figure out the new decks to play, that makes sense to me a little bit.
Modern's already been through Pro Tours and Grand Prix. I think yeah, like you said, it's solid enough now. And honestly, I can't even see what fairies wouldn't even be a contender. Even with Bitter Blossom, I just don't see it. Like maybe some of the newer cards that have been printed, some of the new sets might enable fairies, but I just don't see it at the moment. I think it'd be good actually to unban it and see what would happen, just like they did with Valakut. See if a new deck could appear and
Yeah.
shake things
Well,
up.
see, yeah, Valakut, that's another one of the cards that they banned because they didn't want everyone just starting that deck up day one.
Yeah.
You see?
Okay. Well, moving next on the list, and it's very controversial, but I think I have to agree is Blazing Shoal.
Yeah,
It was so weird
it's
in the Pro
weird.
Tour.
It didn't win.
No, it
because
didn't win at all.
But it's a style of deck that if anybody plays DBZ, it reminded me of Cosmic Backlash, and I won't get into that. But basically, the way Blazing Shoal works is that they have an infect guy, any infect guy, and they pitch a Progenitus to Blazing Shoal or a Dragon Storm and kill you.
And the rest of the deck is just dedicated to finding those cards, and it works.
Yeah.
And it's not because it's fast. It's not because it's hard to stop. And it's not because it's powerful. It's because the circumstance well, it is because of those things. But the circumstance it creates is just so low in interaction. You don't play Magic. They either have it or they don't. You flip the coin. It's very much like Belcher, but more consistent. And it's just not good for the game.
No, it's not even really that it was that powerful.
It wasn't that powerful. That's the weird thing.
It creates
it does lose a lot.
It creates an unnatural play experience. Which
Exactly.
Which is another. If it's significant enough, and it takes a lot. Like it takes something like Blazing Shoal, like Bloodbraid Elf cascading into Liliana. That's not an unnatural play experience. When you kill their infect guy twice, they have another infect guy. You get them to 1 life, and they rip the Blazing Shoal and kill you. That's kind of an unnatural play experience.
And for those of you who aren't or are familiar with the Magic Show, find the Magic Show and watch his episode where he interviews a lot of professional players talking about the upcoming modern format and Blazing Shoal. And one of the players named Drew Levin puts it a very good way. He says, they play Inkmoth Nexus Go, you have a turn. You have 1 turn, all of your sorcery speed removal doesn't matter. You guys who can't fly, they're irrelevant to the they untap Blazing Shoal, you're dead. That's the format. It's that degenerate, games in that quickly. It was something along those lines, and I think it was an accurate description. It just wasn't good for something like that to exist. And what's interesting though is an infect strategy still exists, much more interactive. It's a very good contender, and maybe even tier 1 to a degree, and it doesn't use. But in Blazing Shoal, and honestly, it might even win the same match. Just the way it wins is bad for the day, and maybe a little less. But Blazing Shoal wasn't banned because it was too good or there seemed too much play and winning too many tournaments. That wasn't why it was banned. And that's clear. That's not the central criteria for banning a card. And I think this is a good example of good R&D when they banned this card, and they let it play out. They saw what happened, and they saw the consequences, and they did something about it. And everybody liked it.
This shows you more of the lack of vision that they have, really, because they thought cards like Ancestral Vision and Bitter Blossom couldn't be in the format, but that Blazing Shoal was fine.
Exactly. And
initially, from the get-go.
And I think this was also a part of the community. The community wanted Blazing Shoal banned.
Yeah.
And in the words of Jerry Thompson, it's hilarious that Blazing Shoal has to be banned, but it's got to be done. So moving on to the next card is Bloodbraid Elf. We already talked about that. So now the next serious one is Chrome Mox. This one's a little interesting. People don't give it a lot of thought. We don't really have a lot of experience with the card.
Yeah, like this is one where Aaron Forsyth, who is the head of R&D, is just, it makes no sense to me. Okay, yeah, the guy was a world champion. He beat Kai Bood. I don't care anymore. Okay, literally he said, this is what he said. And, our audience, I'm not sure how many of you guys are really into high-level Magic, but he said that turn 1 Dark Confidant is something nobody wants to play with. He said that speeding combo decks up a turn is nothing anybody wants to play with. And I can blame this partly on the fact that when Aaron Forsythe was playing competitive Magic, Palinchron was a card that was valuable. So take that, and I'm sure there's fanboys of Palinchron who still play him in their EDH decks, but like the days of 7 mana creatures that combo you out on turn 15, that's not really where Magic's at now. So in that scope, let's go back and think about this. Turn 1 Dark Confidant. Okay, so I'm going to go 7 cards here. We're counting, right? You go land, Chrome Mox, the card on Chrome Mox, and
your Dark Confidant on turn 1. You're down to 3 cards in your hand.
This is if you didn't mulligan. If you mulliganed, you're down to 2. If you mulligan twice, you're down to 1
So basically, Dark Confidant only starts generating card advantage after like 2 turns.
Yeah. You basically mulliganed if you have Chrome Mox in your hand. Think about that for a minute. Think of that from a strategic point of view. If you draw a hand with Chrome Mox, you've basically mulliganed, but you get an extra land. Like it's not just a straight extra land because you're pitching an extra card on top of that out of your hand.
Not a land, a card.
Yeah, not a land, a card. So you've got your lands, the cards that are going on Chrome Mox, and the Chrome Mox. So just your land and Chrome Mox occupies 3 cards in your hand. Okay, like that's something that's subtle that a lot of players won't realize. It's like, oh, I can just have faster mana. Yeah, not all decks really can take advantage of that. Like, let's go back to Storm combo. Storm needs to hit a critical amount of spells, because Storm triggers off how many spells you've played, and it's really hard to play spells without cards in your hand. Like, it's pretty difficult. I mean,
yeah,
it happens, but I pretty much hear when you don't have cards in your hand, you don't play too many spells.
And you usually don't win a whole lot of games.
Those usually go together, right?
Yeah.
So let's go through that again. Land and Chrome Mox is 3 cards out of your hand. If you didn't mulligan, that's 4. How are you getting to 20 Storm to kill me with Grape Shot with 4 cards in your hand?
Yeah, especially anytime soon. And the more time you give your opponent with Storm, the less likely you're going to win. And
I mean, the best thing you could do is turn 1, Mox out an Ascension, and then throw down a cantrip. So next turn, if you draw another one of those cantrips, you can put counters. But now you're down to 1 card in your hand, and you're relying off the top of your deck to trigger your Ascension. And then you still have 1 card in your hand. How are you going to cast your rituals? This doesn't make any sense. Anybody who understands Magic... Okay, you know what Chrome Mox helps? It helps mid-rangey decks, kind of like Jund. It's kind of like a Mana Dork. Okay, and it also helps control decks speed up when they're on the draw. That is the number 1 use of Chrome Mox. It allows, on the draw, a control deck to have 2 mana open for their mana leak or their remand. If you're a control deck, you're going to mulligan on the play a Chrome Mox because it's a mulligan anyway. Okay, now on the draw, you're not going to mulligan a Chrome Mox because you're already behind a card. You're up a card because you're on the draw, and you need that extra tempo so you can play your counter spells. So Chrome Mox helps controls decks and really slower mid-range. I don't even know that modern Jund would want to play Chrome Mox when they have access to Deathrite Shaman, but that's kind of where Chrome Mox fits in. The other beauty of Chrome Mox is it increases your artifact count so that you can pitch it to Thirst for Knowledge, which, what plays that? What plays that? Yeah, that's right. Control decks play that. So everyone who's griping about control decks being weak, I can't guarantee you Chrome Mox is going to fix that, but that's where that card goes. It doesn't go in your Storm. It doesn't go in your turn 1 Dark Confidant decks. It just doesn't work like that.
Honestly, it won't really even go in control decks because there really aren't any. And maybe it could enable control decks.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. A control deck would play this, so if it was around, you could start kicking around some control decks. Like I said, if you open your hand with it, you're going to mulligan on the play because it's a mulligan anyway. On the draw, you're going to keep it so you can catch up in mana and be able to interact with your opponent sooner.
And also another thing to keep in mind, it was also a launch ban, so I guess they were also nervous about it, even though there weren't really any decks that used it. I don't think it fits the same development criteria as Bitter Blossom did. That made more sense as a launch ban. Maybe they were just too worried about Storm or other combo decks, but it's definitely at the point where it needs to come off and see how it interacts. I don't even see it really interacting much at all. I don't even think Jund decks wants to play it because that's slots in their deck. It's bad in it's Storm and other combos, so maybe the best thing it would do is help make stuff like Splinter Twin a turn faster that might be the very best thing, and that's not even that good. So I don't know. I think it come off. We need to at least see what it does before anything else. Now that there's a developed format. Unfortunately, though, we are out of time. Stay tuned for the next podcast. We're going to finish the list. We're going to talk about a few of the things and some of the events that occurred. But thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time.